Okay, so this is Larry Legend, a really big part of the New York City scene. And yeah, so how old were you when you started playing music?
Probably 6, something like that.
What did you start on?
Piano.
Okay.
We used to go to like a group piano class, kind of like Suzuki but for piano, and it was the brand was Yamaha.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you started on classical music?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the first few songs were like nursery rhymes, and then I guess it worked in the classical music. But we didn't like to go. My sister, who's 2.5 years older, we used to go together with my mom and dad every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
It was the worst.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of fun. So then how did you get into bluegrass?
It all happened maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I had gotten really into music in high school, and then I got into jazz, and then I ended up going 2 years to a non-music school, and then switching to a music major while I was there. Then I went to Berkeley and was just like all jazz all the time, jazz piano, and then I hurt my wrist when I was there by kind of trying to play and practice too much, so I stopped.
Okay.
And then through my 20s, I was trying to do stuff in music, but not as someone who was playing music. Like I worked for a record label and worked as a recording engineer, and wanted to be like a producer kind of person. And then after several years of that, I was looking for other things to do for work, because it was getting to be not that fun to try to couple together a living doing that stuff.
Yeah.
And then so I had stopped playing music, and then I moved back to New York, and I just started taking guitar lessons, just sort of more the way a normal person takes guitar lessons, for like a very mild hobby.
Yeah.
And I was doing that for a couple years, and I kind of just slowly started doing it more. And then so I guess this is a long way to say that I started taking guitar lessons, and I'd been doing it for like a year or two, and then I went with a friend to Rockwood to see this person who I never heard of called Michael Daves.
Okay.
And he was playing that I don't
Tuesday night set.
Yeah, the Tuesday night set at 10. But also back then he often played this smaller guitar made of plywood. I think it's like a True Tone brand.
Okay.
Have you seen? I don't know if he doesn't do it that much anymore, but have you seen videos where he's playing that?
Probably.
Yeah. So it's very like buzzy and drony the way he plays it.
Yeah.
And he kind of tunes it way down, but it makes a lot of like buzzy noise. Yeah, and so it sounded very kind of like drony, and it the way he was singing too, I wasn't used to someone even singing regular bluegrass.
Yeah.
And then he was doing it a little more screamy even. And I was just like, this is amazing. But then, so I just like looked him up when I got home, and signed up for his email list. And then, I don't know, probably several weeks later, I got an email that said that he was teaching classes about like intro to bluegrass guitar, something like that. And so I just decided to take that class to augment my guitar lessons I was taking.
Okay.
And then, because I knew he was he was just like an awesome musical person. And I just kind of wanted to, if he was going to teach classes, I wanted to see what they were all about. And it was so amazing, because I'd never sat in front of someone playing an acoustic guitar like that, where like so much sound comes out of the instrument, and I don't know, I guess maybe I've learned sort of the different parts of playing that go into it somewhat, but it was just so cool to be there in front of him in this little class. And so that year he taught like 5 different classes.
Yeah, he does every year.
Yeah, and I after the first week of the first one, I just signed up for all his classes. I just sent him like a PayPal for the entire year of classes.
That's great.
And that just with each one, I kind of got more and more hooked on bluegrass. Yeah.
So you play the bass now. How did that come about?
Well, from the exposure through those classes, I started going to jams, which seemed super fun too, because I always liked playing with other people when I used to play jazz. That was the most fun part. And so I was like, great, this is a great, it's also like when you're starting out, and I mean, I'm still not great at guitar, but when you're starting out, you feel very hesitant about like you don't know how you would ever like play with other people in a band or
Yeah.
stuff like that, and so jams are so good for that. So I started going to jams, and I noticed that there was no bass, and there were always like 5 or 6 guitar players, and a lot of times you can't even hear your own guitar.
Yeah.
So then I was like, oh. So then I hadn't really. That's all I'd noticed up to that point. Then I went to Gray Fox that year.
Yes.
So this all happened like in this one year, and
Which Gray Fox? Which year?
I don't know. I'd have to check my chronology,
Okay.
like the calendar, but it was probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
And at Gray Fox, because it's like everybody's a bluegrass person, you see so many more just like banjos and fiddles and upright basses than you just see in normal life, even at a jam.
Yeah.
And so once I just saw all those people with upright basses, I was just like, it put the thought in my mind like, oh, I could just get an upright bass. That's probably not that hard.
Yeah.
And then when I got back, I just went to this bass store in New York called David Gage.
Okay. And
they had a rent to buy program where you can rent a bass for 3 months, and then if you like the experience, then you can use what you paid renting a bass
and buy it.
Towards that bass or a different bass probably.
Okay.
So I did that.
Did you stick with this bass?
No, I was actually renting a modern like Shen type bass. And so I didn't actually. This one was an older K that was on consignment.
Okay.
And so I bought this because they didn't actually have it was the cheapest one they had.
Okay.
But they didn't have the ones that was equivalent to the one that I was renting that was even cheaper. So I wasn't able, anyway, because it was on consignment, I didn't get to use the rental credit towards it, but it still worked out great, and I love this bass. And
it's a cool bass.
Yeah, it's cool. It's been really fun to play since then.
So what would you say is the initial draw you had to bluegrass?
It's cool that it's acoustic instruments, so there's kind of like no extra overhead of like a bunch of gear and amps and pedals and stuff that's there's a little bit like a kind of like there's like no BS to it. Similar when you just play an acoustic piano, there's a simplicity to that, and then the rest is kind of up to you. That was cool, and it was fun that there was a lot of opportunity to play with other people.
Yeah.
And the kind of groovy, fun part about it, where just people are kind of, that like two-feel thing, it's just immediately groovy, even in the hands of the beginners at jams. It still has like a fun groove to it, which is just fun. And then the bluesy aspect of it too is, I always like that in music, like the flat thirds with the major thirds and the flat sevens and all that. And then the other thing is, I was friends with a group of a few other Michael Dave students at the time, and we used to talk about we were just like in the school of Michael Dave's, and if he played some other style of music, if it was polka or punk rock or whatever, we would just be playing that kind of music because we were almost just so inspired by him that we were just doing sort of what he does. So.
Nice. So you've been in the scene for about 5 years?
Yeah, maybe a little more.
Okay.
The years kind of start stacking up, but maybe 6-ish years, something like that.
Right. Have you seen the scene in New York City evolve in that time? Like the bluegrass scene?
Seems like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I definitely notice is there's different, just kind of like you're in school right now, and then, so next year you're going to be what?
11th grade.
11th grade.
Yeah.
So already when those 9th graders come in, they look like a completely different generation to you, and because now you're in 11th grade, you recognize that they're like, like eager-eyed and like but also like kind of new to the school. They don't know where anything is and everything.
Yeah.
And so it just being around for a few years, you kind of notice that when like oh, who are all these new people who are coming to the jam that I've been going to now for like a year or two, but you get so like you feel like it's your jam. Then all these new people come, and then eventually you become friends and familiar with those people, and then it almost makes like these like little micro generations. So just being around for 6 years or whatever, I've seen like a couple waves of that. So the people change, but it's almost like they take the role of somebody else behind them.
Yeah.
And so it's fun to see that. And as far as the nature of the scene, I'm not sure. I don't think I'll have the perspective on that until more time goes by. But it's been fun to hear in New York about how there was like a scene before, and there was something called Alphabet City Opry, and like a whole,
I've never heard of that.
Oh yeah,
no.
Yeah. So if you talk to some of the people who have been playing bluegrass in New York for like 20 years, they talk about that. And there was this guy Greg Gehring, and then there was sort of, as far as I understand it, right when I was getting into it, Michael was still playing some with Chris Thiele, or it just finished sort of that period.
Around that time.
And I think that was sort of like another stage of it. And then Mona's has been going strong, led by Rick for So I think that the culture of that jam has stayed similar, but it's sort of has some of that generational aspect to it too, just even in those 6 years. I don't know if it's getting more popular or if I just know more about this jam and that jam, but it seems like it's growing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a jam every night in the city.
Is there?
For the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, or there's always something happening.
Yeah.
Okay, you're kind of a part of this, but there are a lot of people in like their 20s and 30s playing. When traditionally bluegrass is like for older folks most of the time, like at least in other states and things, you'll find jams with like a bunch of really old folks, and like you find that here too. But there seems to be like a huge community of like people in their 20s and 30s playing. Why do you think that is?
It's a good question. I don't know. I'm not sure why. I could guess. I definitely, in my mind, I pictured that there is sort of like a couple humps of age distribution. There's those people in their 20s and 30s, and then there's sort of like nobody as much in their 30s, 40s, maybe, and then when 50s and 60s, it sort of comes back up when people are like getting really into banjo in their retirement or whatever. So, probably a lot of it just has to do with the people who have discretionary time to go to jams and stuff. And so people who are, either retired or getting towards the mature ender part of their career have a little more time. And then, people in their 20s and 30s are like new to New York and have time. And then, when they're in their 30s and 40s, maybe they're like focused more on family stuff and kids. And but I think there's also like a popularity aspect to it too, where some of those older folks maybe were into it in either the 60s and 70s or early 80s, when I think there was some amount of popularity to bluegrass.
Yeah.
And then there might have been a little bit of a wane of popularity, and then it seems now there's a huge increase in just sort of like anything that sort of is nostalgic and American, whether it's like reclaimed wood in yuppie Brooklyn bars, or artisanal mayonnaise, and like I think bluegrass fits into that a little bit, like back to basics. And we spend so much time on our phones and technology and stuff that it's super appealing to people, even younger people. So
yeah. Do you have any standout experiences playing in the New York scene, or in general?
What do you mean by stand out? In what way stand out are you thinking?
Like, I don't know, the coolest thing or the funnest thing that happened. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I've done so many fun things. It's really a wonderful community, and it's crazy in New York that there's so many amazing musicians who are around, and partly just from playing bass, which has a relatively low barrier to entry compared to playing like bluegrass fiddle or
you get all the gigs.
Yeah, so I've been able to play with just so many amazing people on a semi-regular basis, and so that continues to be just like mind-blowing to me and incredible. And it's fun because the more you play with good people, the better you get.
Yeah,
and so
definitely.
it's helped just get me up to speed somewhat. It's always fun to play at the Michael Dave's Jam on the first Monday. That's something I've been going to ever since that first year.
Okay.
And so just, I keep going back, and year by year I get a little better at it. I definitely get more comfortable with the whole thing. And I started going to the Mona's Jam a few years ago and sitting in on bass, and that was super intense at first because it's definitely just a higher level jam, and you get a little less coddled, and people are calling a lot more variety of tunes.
Yeah.
And they're just things are faster. Everything's happening faster.
Yes.
But you know, the people, Rick in particular, I think when they see someone who's excited about the music, and also I think on bass too, they're willing to give you a little extra help, just because if you gotta get the bass player on board anyway, or the whole thing's not gonna work. So anyway, Rick and a couple other people were generous about, like, if I didn't know some crazy tune they were calling, then they'd walk me through it real quick before we played it, and so that was very welcoming. But anyway, that's been a really fun jam to go to, although I don't go as much anymore just because it goes so late.
Yeah, I love how like every Monday, like I'll see on Facebook or Instagram, like, come playing at Mona's tonight, 9:30 to late.
Yeah.
Or something, you know. The
Sonny's Jam can be really fun. And for a year I played that every week as the house bass player. That was like a little gig I had when they started having a house bass player. And it could be grueling because it could be anywhere from like 4 to 7 hours straight of bass playing.
Wow, but 7 hours.
Yeah, because if it starts at 9 and then just to get to midnight is 3 hours. So the latest it would go would be 4 a.m. and a few times I would stick around that long, but after I did that a few times, I realized I should probably just go home at 1-ish, and then
are you gonna go tonight?
Better for the next day. I don't know, have to see. But that's a fun part about the Saturday night jam at Sonny's is, you know, if you end up being out, a lot of people end up being like, oh, let's go somewhere else, let's go down to Sonny's and see what's going on down there. So that's fun.
I see pictures from that jam from I don't know, post some Michael something. I don't know.
Yeah.
He posts pictures every Saturday.
Yeah. And another thing that was really like a peak. I mean, I guess I could just keep listing stuff that was fun because it's all fun, but along with a couple other people from the Michael Dave's world, Robert Kitchens and Kay Prasher, we made a band. This is also sort of towards those early days, and we decided, okay, we're going to be a band. And then, like, pretty much the next week, Kate got an email that said, oh, we're opening this restaurant and kind of restaurant bar, and we're looking for a bluegrass to play the opening, and we're looking for a bluegrass trio because we kind of have this like number 3 theme going. Yeah. And then
I guess so, because they're called Threes.
Yeah, and now it turned out to be Threes Brewing. So we played before they opened for kind of like a soft launch opening just for like friends and family, and then they asked us to start playing every week, and we did that for like a long time, like
you're still
1 or 2 years. But we did it every week, and it was with this same band of 3 of us.
Wow.
So the first time we had to learn 3 hours of tunes, and so we played every song that any of us knew to get through the 3 hours. But we did a pretty good job, and then we just kept doing it, and we got better and better as a group, and that was really fun. And then eventually we were able to just, we instead of distributing out the money from each gig, we just put it basically in our band bank account.
Okay.
And then so we had thousands of dollars in there from playing it every week. So we were able to finance our own record and our own tour just off our like band budget.
That's
cool. It was pretty awesome. So that was a huge opportunity.
So now Sean Keeley plays with you guys in that?
Sean Kiley often plays. Yeah. He lives in Jersey City.
Yeah.
So he'll play sometimes. Well, really, how it is now is Kate and I usually play, and then we grab 1 or 2 other people, just whoever we can get, different amazing guitar players. And
you've been getting some really good bands the last couple of
weeks. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
We were driving up to Delfest, and I'm like, you know, this is the one Sunday where he's got like the best band there is, and we're not. I can't go. I think it was Ross Martin and Kenny Kosek playing with you guys.
Oh yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, so I get to play with Kate a lot.
Yeah.
And then and Robert. He's been working at Rockwood since he moved back to town, and so he's got his own night that's turned into like kind of an extravaganza music variety show with all different people he knows. And so Kate and I have been playing with him now and then on that too, and he's got this other kind of country band happening, so yeah.
So you were talking about this a lot before, but there's a really strong scene and community around bluegrass.
Yeah.
How do you think the community affects how the music progresses? Or do you?
I don't know. Explain more about that. That's an interesting question.
Well, I mean, there's like a huge community around this kind of music.
Yeah.
And the music has obviously changed some in the past like 20 years that it's been around.
Yeah.
Do you think that like the community, like the people around it, have anything to do with how it changes, or like why it's changing, or like if it's getting better or worse or something?
I think for sure. Obviously, yeah. But I think it can come down to like things that sort of are just circumstance, but they end up having these effects, like for example, that band I was just talking about with Kate in it. Kate used to host a jam in Ditmas Park at a place called Sycamore.
Really?
Yeah, and so she did that once a month or twice I guess it was once a month. It was kind of opposite the Michael Dave's jam on third Mondays or something, I think.
Okay.
I could be just remembering this wrong, but
okay.
It was definitely a regular jam. And so people used to go to that, and then a little micro community developed around that jam, and that's sort of where that band came out of. Is it was just almost the people who went to the jam every week, and now I see that like a lot of people who go to the Saturday Night Sunny's jam. There's some bands that have spun off of that little micro pop. So that kind of thing, I don't know. It's almost like some kind of musical petri dish, and then like things grow in around the little jams or culture of the different things, and like even I noticed that since that Sad Song Happy Hour Jam was at a reasonable time on a Friday, and it's not a bar, then you were able to come often. Yeah. And so probably that gave you a reason to keep practicing fiddle tunes each week, because then you knew you had some kind of context to play in, so that might have, those kind of things might be more encouraging, where otherwise you might have just been like, you know what, I think I'm going to do photography or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. And then, whenever you go to a new school, or when you go off to college, like there may be some other entirely different context, and so that might change your course, and you'll bring whatever it is that you love and your personality to like whatever context you end up being in at that point. That might not be bluegrass, or it might be your, what I'm saying. Okay,
here's the tough question.
Uh-oh.
If you could describe bluegrass in one word or phrase, what would it be?
I don't know. Do I really have to make up an answer?
Yep.
I can do a phrase, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's like to me this is the phrase. It's like a hybrid or a confluence of folk traditions, and then dressed up a little bit for like stage performance, essentially. Okay. Because I think what it came out of with Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys was he was taking obviously like the different pieces of different folk music that he was exposed to, like whatever the gospel music and brother duets and jazz and blues and Appalachian music, rolled those different folk traditions together and kind of made like a mishmash, almost like today if you were going to do some kind of like, I don't know, jazz, drum and bass, indie rock, like dubstep hybrid, and you just tried to make like the ultimate crazy like mixed up music. And then the other thing is some of those folk traditions were a little bit more, I guess, like things you do around the house or sitting around, and there wasn't really like a stage and an audience. And he brought a little bit more of like a performance vibe to it. Yeah. And then I think that carries through now, just like in the way that the folkies, when they start songs, they just sort of strum into it. Yeah. And everybody doesn't really come in once, and people sort of like build, drop in as once they figure out what key it's in. Yeah. And in bluegrass, there's a little bit more of a premium on like, let's start the tune, like let's figure out a tempo, a key, and then we'll get someone to kick it off. We'll make a nice intro, and it'll like come in with a little bit of professional bang. Yeah. And so some of that I think stems back to that, and Bill Monroe also trying to set his band apart from what they called hillbilly music at the time. Yeah. So they were wearing suits instead of dressing up as like some kind of hillbilly stereotype with a hat and what do you call it, overalls. And stuff. Yeah. So.
Okay. So you mentioned this earlier, but you run this great event called Sad Song Happy Hour. How did that start?
It started when I think we had played a gig at Threes, and I was walking back from that on Union Street, and we walked by Mirror Tea House. Okay. And the person I now know as Fumio was outside, and he's like, "Oh, hey, you guys are musicians? We're looking for musicians. We have this coffee tea house thing here." Okay. And so my friend, like that, if someone says that to you on the street when you're walking by with your instrument cases and the bass and stuff, that's not like a good pitch. That's sort of like, I don't think I really want to talk to you. But so my friends were already like halfway down the block at that point, and I was just being sort of like a little extra like too nice, which I often am, for better or for worse. And so I was just like kind of chatting with the guy, and he was like, "Yeah, come inside. We had like a really nice piano and everything." And then so there's this door that just looks like.
You never go into a stranger's
I know, and it just looks like an apartment kind of. And he just opens the door, but inside it's this beautiful space. Yeah. They had a really nice piano, and I think also in the back of my mind I already was like thinking like, wow, the ultimate thing would be is if I could get a weekly way to play, and just be able to play every week. Yeah. Just because I already knew that was great from Threes doing bluegrass, and I was looking for a way to do it with like where I could sing a little more and play guitar, and essentially try to do a very, very light version of what Michael has been doing for like at this point 12 years or whatever at Rockwood every night. And because he's so good at that, and I would like to be better at doing that, because there again it's like no BS, just like you and an acoustic guitar and you're singing, and so there's a lot you have to do to make that awesome. And so I had played a few gigs like that in the preceding months, but I was so nervous and also not great at it, so I just wanted to get better at that. And so the first couple I just sort of played from like 4 to 6 p.m. at that coffee shop when no one was there. Okay. And that seemed okay, but no one was there. No one really it just didn't seem like that was going to be a thing that made sense or was sustainable. Yeah. So then the next idea I had was like, oh, maybe let's, like if I had someone come and play with me like on fiddle, then I don't have to take a bunch of breaks, because then I can get the fiddle player to do that. Yeah. And B, it might be like a little more of like a thing we're seeing. Yeah. So some really generous people did that the first couple times with me, like Melody Berger and Libby. And so that was kind of cool. And then I was like, oh, well, they might not want to just play with me. Maybe they would like to do their own set. And then so that's how I got the idea that the other person could do a solo set, and plus I wanted to see what they would do.
Yeah.
Because then I could learn from that.
Okay.
And then also I was like, and you know what? People probably, it'd be fun to have a jam too, especially if I have this guest here. People want to jam with the guest just like I want to jam with the guest.
Yeah.
And then so then that kind of came together, and I just been doing that ever since, and people seem to like it, and like enough people come that it's like it's worth doing.
Yeah.
And so we've just been doing it for almost every week since then for like a couple years.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I mean, it's the only jam I know of in New York City that's not in a bar.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it.
I'm really glad. It's been great to have you play all the time. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's a lot of fun. You've gotten some really incredible guests.
I know, it's amazing. I'm thrilled. The whole thing that makes it cool is all those guests who are sort of down to do it, mostly just for the fun of it and for the challenge of playing solo, and also I think like the community aspect of bluegrass is so important, and they're down to do it from that perspective too. Like there's pretty much no one who's too good to just like do a couple songs with the regular people.
Yeah.
And so that's really cool too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it wasn't for your jam, I probably would not be playing as much
that's
as I
cool.
do. So.
That's nice to hear.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, my pleasure.
And most of these interviews wouldn't have happened for sure.
Oh yeah.
I met them all through.
Oh, cool.
Song. Like, except for like Sheriff, but like the first bunch of interviews I've met all through.
Yeah.
Sad Song Happy Hour.
Cool.
So, thank you.
Oh, that's great.
You've provided people with this project.
Yeah, and I guess that's the answer to your question about the influence of the community on the music and stuff, and yeah. Yeah.
So you made a CD a while ago.
Oh yeah.
And all the songs that you have on there are the songs you sing at Sad Song.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did you write your CD? Like, how did you?
Oh yeah. Well.
Your songs are pretty funny.
Oh.
I enjoy them.
Thanks. Well, I started writing songs because just like anybody starts writing songs, you're like, oh, maybe I'll try writing a song, and then okay, well, maybe I'll try writing another song, and you sort of just do that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them I was sort of writing with the idea that they could work in the Tumble or maybe one of the other groups I was in, or something. I wasn't really sure, but then I realized that those weren't necessarily the best context for some of those songs.
Mm-mm.
And then after a while, I'd written enough songs that I was like, well, I should do something with these songs. Oh, and also I was in with a couple friends of mine. We started like kind of like a rock band or like a pop punk band.
Okay.
And this is around the same time I got into Michael Daves. So those were like two things. And the punk side of me sort of withered and died as I got more into bluegrass.
Okay.
Not really, but that band sort of ran its course. But what's the point? Oh, so some of the songs I had kind of for that context,
Mm-hmm.
or I was trying to figure out where to use them, and then I don't know, at a certain point I was like, I have all these songs, and I sort of set the personal challenge to myself that I wanted to be able to play them just by myself at like Pete's Candy Store or something.
Okay.
And so this one New Year's, this is like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I decided, okay, my New Year's resolution is I'm gonna set up a gig at Pete's Candy Store.
Okay.
And so I like to stay inside on New Year's Eve and avoid the crowds, and also my birthday's on January 1st, so it's like a very big
it's a very big night.
Kind of big night, but I like to use it for like goal setting and personal reflection and stuff. It's just like kind of lame and hilarious, but also I like it feels good to me to do that.
Sure.
And so that January December 31st, I emailed Pete's Candy Store. I had the week prior, I had off from work. I had been like working on little iPhone demos of my songs, and then I put them on SoundCloud, and I kind of called them an EP.
Okay.
So it like seemed like I had done something.
Yeah.
And then I emailed Pete's Candy Store, and I knew the booker Jake from, I just met him somewhere out at one of his gigs or something, and before midnight on New Year's Eve, he had already written me back and like sent me a date, and so I was like, wow, well, this New Year's resolution is off to a great start.
Yeah.
And so I played that gig at several weeks later, and that's the one that was so like I was just so nervous and could also kind of barely just accompany myself, and so what was the question again? Oh, the album. Oh yeah. So then once I started doing that, I knew that once I got more practice doing that, I would want to record the album. So first step was like kind of work those songs and then get better at them and then record an album of them. And then once I had the album recorded, then I kind of wanted to play them more so people would know about them, so they might go on Spotify and check out the album or whatever. And so that's kind of how it worked out. And another awesome opportunity in the past couple of years that just has been such an amazing thing has been on Wednesday nights. I play in Jersey City with a great bluegrass band with Sean Kiley.
Yeah.
And
at the Archer.
Yeah, and Bobby Hawk. And then we usually have a fourth person like on banjo or sometimes mandolin who rotates, and we just get different people. And so I grabbed Rob, aka Bobby Hawk, and so he played duo with me on the album. And again, kind of that way I didn't have to take as many solos. He could take all the little solos and fill things out. And so that was wonderful to have him. And you know, until then I wouldn't have even dreamed that I could get someone of that level to play with me on my little songs. Yeah. But just knowing him from the Archer, he was down to do it, and he brought so much to it. So it was that, you know, once the pieces kind of fall into place, then you're like, oh, I'm ready to do this, and then you just kind of do it. So.
Why did you decide to have like a duo, like with just guitar and fiddle?
Yeah, I just wanted to make it as like straightforward as possible, and then I knew like once if you had like a whole band with like drums and bass, it was just gonna get more complicated, more expensive, more choices to make. So if I could have done it completely solo, I probably would have done that. But then it's also nice just to have a little bit of give and take, and also I love. Like, you know, there's like the 5-piece classic bluegrass group. I kind of, also in jazz too, when I was in the jazz, I always liked a trio versus a big band. I always liked the trio better because there's sort of more space for different things to happen. There's just more space in general, which I think like hits my ear better. Yeah. And so the same sort of you know, 10 out of 10 level of sonics and filled up space and almost like a little bit of musical chaos that's in a big band or a 5-piece bluegrass band. Like a smaller band, like a duo or a trio, I always like better. Well, not always, but you know what I mean. I have I've noticed a preference for that. Like Eli West and Cahalan Morrison have some duo records, and I just love it because there's so much room for the interplay, and you can hear each instrument really clearly, and each instrument has just that much more of an impact. And there's also a little less, what do you call it? Like prescribed roles for the instruments, where in a 5-piece bluegrass band at this point, we all agree what the instruments are going to do. But in a duo of like guitar and mandolin, there's definitely some prescription there, but there's more room for like different things to happen. So. Yeah, so I hoped it would be like that, but I'm not on the level where I could interact with Rob Hecht the way Eli and Cahalan do, but, you know, with my guitar playing, but still has a little of that vibe.
Nice. Well, thank you for talking to me today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks, Emma. So we got 2, 1, 2, 3. Always there, shining down upon me with her one-way stare. I try to talk to her, but she don't care, 'cause she's 200,000 miles away from here, way up in the sky. She can't hear us. I wanna fly up and take her out to dinner, but all I got is chicken wings. I have the blues, can't get no cheese, 'cause she's 200,000 miles out in the if you won't talk to us, why'd you put us here in the first place? I close the book and I rest my case, 'cause she's 200,000 miles in outer space. It's dark down here, I don't know why. I can't even tell if I should sing or if I should cry. All I know is I'll be sleeping soon, and in